been spending the last couple of months actually on this very topic, understanding the nose and ins and outs of the corneal topography, tomography. And what I've been trying to achieve with the talk today is to get people away from a quantitative analysis of the cornea and towards a more qualitative assessment of the corneal topography. A lot of people have focused a lot on how the difference between the superior and inferior curvature maps, looking at the thinnest point of the elevation maps, and that's all fine, but you miss a great amount of people if you're not doing a proper qualitative assessment of the topography, and that's the main point of today's lecture. Right, so the first bit, what I wanted to focus on is what is the difference between a corneal topography and a corneal tomography. Now, even something called a corneal topography is a misnomer. I won't get into that, but topography is basically looking at an analysis of only the anterior curvature of the cornea, and mainly they are Placido based. So what you're doing is you're shining light onto the eye, and you're taking away the reflections from the eye, and you're analyzing data of that reflection. Now, there are certain limitations associated with this technique. So these are all of the listed limitations. So there's no analysis of the posterior surface. So as we all know about keratoconus and what's been published so extensively over the past couple of years, is that the keratoconic cone develops from the posterior cornea. So if you are looking at a Placido-based topography, you're basically looking at the anterior surface, and you will miss a lot of early onset keratoconics because they will not present to you on an anterior surface topography. There's no indication of any sort of pachymetry. So if you have a thin cornea, or if you have a cornea that has a thinnest point that's dislocated, you're not going to find it. Now, previously, our gold standard test for the thinning of the cornea was the ultrasound analysis, and it looked at the apex of the cornea, or whatever the operator chose to see. We don't know how well it was aligned. But you will see throughout this lecture that whatever we're measuring at the apex is not actually the thinnest point. And we miss a lot of thinned out corneas by using that ultrasound technique. And then, even the best of topographers only look at the central 9 millimeters. And because of that, not only did we previously overdiagnose patients with pellucid marginal degeneration, as you will see, we can't see a lot of patients that have pathology outside the central 9 millimeters. And I'll go over angle Kappa and why it's going into false positives in the next few slides. So this is the basic refractive screen that you're going to look at when you're looking at the tomography report. Right? The first is the axial curvature. Right next to it is the front elevation data. Then you have the pachymetry, the corneal thickness, and all of its presentations. And then you have the back elevations. Now, another part of this talk is to get people away from using sagittal curvature maps to diagnose keratoconus, because they're using sagittal curvature principle, they are highly dependent on not only alignment, but if any person has a high angle kappa, as I'll tell you, they will present with highly keratoconic features. So, a sagittal curvature map basically takes into account, they assume 4 things: that the line of sight, the center of the pupil, the corneal apex, and the measurement axis, these are all equal. That's what it's taking into account, and this is known as the Goldstrand reduced eye. Now, over the many decades of research on this topic, we know most eyes do not follow the Goldstrand reduced eye. Now, I'm just going to quickly go through the curvature maps because this is something that I want to divert attention away from. This is not the first thing that you should be looking on a tomography, right? So, these are the types. So, you've got 4 groups of curvature map analysis. There's symmetric, asymmetric, then you've got unclassified, and you've got skewed. So, in the symmetric analysis, you've got round and oval, which basically indicate a minimal amount of astigmatism, right? So, that's the round and the oval. So less than 0.5 diopters or less than 1 diopter of astigmatism, you're probably going to get something like this. Then you have the symmetric bow tie, which can be vertically oriented or horizontally oriented or obliquely oriented, depending on the axis of astigmatism. Then you have the asymmetric, so superior steep, then asymmetric bow tie, superior steep, inferior steep, and asymmetric bow tie, inferior steep. Then you have the symmetric bow tie with a skewed radial axis and the asymmetric bow tie with a skewed radial axis. And these unclassified, these are always abnormal, regardless of what happens, because this is irregular astigmatism. But again, I'm not going into the quantitative values of all of this data, because one, I want to divert attention away from not only quantitative values, but also the sagittal curvature. So what is angle kappa? So we just discussed what a Gullstrand eye is. But we also know now that almost all normal eye have some amount of angle kappa. What angle kappa is that there's a difference between the center of the pupil, or the pupillary axis, and there's this difference between the visual axis. Basically, that's from the point of fixation to the fovea. So if you see the line, yes, so if you see this line, this is the point of fixation, or where the eye actually focuses the image. And the pupillary axis is simply the center of the pupil. If you have a high angle kappa, your sagittal curvature maps will be out of range. And you will see, and in the next few slides, you will see how that is going to work. Now, a pentacam cannot give you angle kappa. A topograph can, but a pentacam or a corneal tomography that works on the Scheinfeld principle will not give you angle kappa. But what it will give you is the position of the visual axis. So from the position of the visual axis, you can predict angle kappa. The formula that currently is what is being used today is that whatever you get on the x and y values, you divide that by 2, and that's your angle kappa. And the normal values here are the x should be less than minus 0.02 with a high standard deviation, so that's something you want to take into account as well. And then you have a y of negative 0.09, again with a relatively high standard deviation. So when you look at this image, this is a sagittal curvature map. The first two things that should be on your mind right now are angle kappa, misalignment, right? And this is why. If you have someone with a symmetric bow tie pattern of astigmatism, and you have a high angle kappa in the vertical axes, you're going to get, if it's superiorly displaced, you're going to get an asymmetric bow tie, and if it's inferiorly displaced, you're going to get another asymmetric bow tie with an inferior steep. If they're horizontally displaced, you're going to get a skewed radial axis. Then, very similarly, you're going to do the same thing with horizontal. If you have a high angle kappa, meaning the visual axis is separate from the pupillary axis, or a misalignment, again, you're going to misclassify an asymmetric bow tie with a skewed radial axis or steepening. So this is very important. When you're looking at sagittal curvature maps, these are highly dependent on this, because that is an inherent limitation of the sagittal curvature principle. It has nothing to do with if you use a topograph or a tomograph. In either one, a sagittal curvature is going to be highly dependent on this. Now, tangential curvatures, for whatever reason, haven't been, they're not popular, but tangential curvatures are a lot less dependent on something like this. Now, we're going to go directly onto elevation maps now. These are the two most important maps that you should be focusing on, and the theory behind this is also very important. Now, these are two elevation maps. One is a front elevation map, one is a back elevation map. Both of them are showing you a vertically oriented astigmatism. So this is absolutely normal, astigmatic pattern. Right? Now we need to understand that what exactly are we looking at when you're looking at when you're looking at an elevation map. Now you need to remember that you are not looking at raw elevation maps. So the machine takes in a lot of data. You are not looking at the raw data of the machine. If you are looking at the raw data of the machine, you would see this. The normal, mild, and advanced keratoconus do not look different. They look very similar. You're going to miss a lot of stuff there. So what do we do with the elevation data? We're going to put something called a reference surface. Now there's three types of basic reference surface that are currently in use. So you've got the best fit sphere, the best fit ellipsoid, and the best fit toric ellipsoid. Right? The current that's being used is best fit sphere. It's the most popular one. There is some debate whether the best fit toric ellipsoid gives you fewer false positives. But at the moment, the recommendation is the best fit sphere. So what are you doing? So with the best fit sphere, you're going to put a sphere that's averaged according to the corneal elevations, right? So this green thing, this is the corneal surface. And then you put, according to the average, you're going to put a best fit sphere. This is the yellow one, right? So because the cornea is prolate, right? So you're going to get the central, most of, like the normal is a prolate cornea. So you're going to get a central elevation, you're going to see elevated corneas in the center, and you're going to see depressed corneas in the center. Now, is this actually elevated and a depressed cornea? No, because it's only relative to that best fit sphere, right? That's very important to take into mind. And the reason we use a best fit sphere is to amplify and give us an easy tool to be able to pick out keratoconic patients or pick out ectatic corneas very quickly when you look at these four maps very quickly. Now, from these, one very important question is, what is the most accurate, right? Is the best fit sphere more accurate? Is the ellipsoid more accurate? Or is the toric ellipsoid more accurate? And the answer is, none of these are more accurate. The data is the same. The data that you've taken, the machine has that data, it's just extracted out a sphere, or it's extracted out a toric ellipsoid, or it's extracted out an ellipsoid. So all of these are very accurate, it's just the amount of how quickly you can pick out a keratoconic cornea. Right, so this is again, the reference surface, so this blue semicircle, that's the reference surface, so that's the best fit sphere. And we know that there's two principal meridians of the cornea, one's the steep and one's the flat axis. So the flat axis, you're going to see elevations, right, because that's right above the cornea, right? So you see this blue part, this is your elevated cornea above the best fit sphere. And then you've got a steep axis, right? And that's under the best fit sphere. And that's the steep axis that you see here. And this is what you're seeing on an elevation data, right? And it goes to say that the greater the astigmatism, the greater the difference between the values will be. Now, just an introduction to what a difference between a normal astigmatic cornea and a keratoconic cornea would be. So this, what you see on the left here, this is a normal astigmatic pattern, right? So you're seeing a steep axis vertically and a flat axis horizontally. So this is if you saw this on a sagittal curvature, you would see a symmetric bow tie. But when you look here, you're seeing a very keratoconic cornea. Now, what a lot of people will do is they go to this thinnest location, plus 69, and say that this is why this is keratoconic. But you can identify the cone of the keratoconic cornea. If you see this red circle, right, this is a highly elevated area compared to the rest of the cornea. That's your keratoconic cone, and that's what I mean by a qualitative analysis. Now, again, to drill home the point about the reference surface, and this is from the best fit sphere, you have a normal best fit sphere, right, on a normal cornea, and you can see it will take the shape of, or relatively to the cornea. But if you have a keratoconic cornea, you're going to have a best fit sphere that goes somewhere like this, and you're going to see an elevation of the top of the cornea. But what Dr. Belin did that was so brilliant is that he figured out that the elevation, when you're taking an average and you're taking an elevation, you're taking a best fit sphere of the average of the cornea, you see that the best fit sphere is actually going across the cone. So those elevations are not going to present themselves as very high elevations unless it's a very advanced keratoconus on the elevation. So what he did was that he took the thinnest point, and that's usually where the cone is. He took the thinnest point, excluded the 4 millimeters around the cone, and then extrapolated that data according to the periphery of the cornea. So this is what the enhanced best fit sphere looks like. So this is a simple average, right? So the best analogy here would be if you're taking data that's 3, 4, 5, and 20, your average is going to be somewhere around 10, right? Now, you want something that will exclude that 20 and give you a best fit sphere at 3, 4, 5. So what he did was, here where the cone is, he took the 3 to 4 millimeters out and extrapolated this data into the center. So the enhanced best fit sphere is showing the cone a lot more as compared to the normal best fit sphere. Now the tomograph that we see can show both of these, and it's very important to know which one of these you're looking at. Just a couple of weeks ago, we saw that one of our pentacam machines was actually showing us the best fit sphere, while the other was showing us the enhanced best fit sphere on the 4 map. And we saw the elevation data, and we were confused because it looked like the patient had healed. He had taken a topograph at one of our centers, then he took a topograph at the other center, and the elevation data showed that he'd actually healed, which is not possible. So what was going on was, one was showing us the normal best fit sphere, and the other was showing us the enhanced best fit sphere. And just to show you what a practical example looks like, you're going to look at, this is the same patient, right? And you've got a back elevation data. So here, most of us would say that this is probably a normal cornea. You've got some elevations at the periphery, which we don't really care about, right? But there's nothing that you can see in the center that would alert you that this is a keratoconic cornea. But then you enhance that, and you look at the enhanced best fit sphere, right? And you see that the cone, you can now actually see the cone. You're getting a plus 21, plus 17 elevation, and you can see the position of the cone, which is around here right now. And this, again, this is the quantitative analysis that you need to be looking at. You can compare the standard and the enhanced best fit sphere, which you will see in the Belin Ambrosio display. They do this very well. Now, just as the introduction and a quantitative, if you want to look at the quantitative analysis, right? If you have anterior corneal, and these are all at the thinnest point. If you look at the anterior corneal surface, and you look at standard deviations at the anterior corneal surface, you get 4, 6, and 18 in myopic patients. 4, 6, and 8. And if you look at the posterior surface, you're going to get 8, 13, 18. Now, all of these are rounded just to make it a little bit easier. But again, if you get a patient with an elevation of 15, you have to realize that 2 standard deviations means that 5% of the patients will be absolutely normal even at 15 elevation. So if you can't see the cone, but you have elevation at 15, you can also say that 5% of these patients are actually normal. Then hyperopic patients have anterior 2, 4, and 7, with the posterior 16, 22, and 28. Again, it gives you the option to change that on the pentacam. Now, just to quickly run through what are some of the patterns of elevation maps. So this is the normal central island pattern. This is when you have an insignificant corneal astigmatism of less than 1.0 diopters. So this is the central island, and you've got no astigmatism. Then you've got something called a symmetric hourglass, and this is the orientation is based on with the rule, against the rule, or oblique astigmatism. So the steep axis will be changing according to the type of astigmatism you have. Right? Then you've got a tongue or a skewed hourglass. Now again, just like the sagittal curvature, this can happen in a symmetric hourglass when you have misalignment or a large angle kappa. But elevation data is a lot less dependent on angle kappa. So these are a lot more valuable to you. And you can always see the position of the cone. And if you can see the position of the cone, you can be fairly certain that you have a keratoconic patient. Then this is an irregular pattern. But remember, all of these maps are normal if the values are normal, or if there's no cone present. So if you can identify the cone, right, or your elevation data is out of range, then only this elevation data will give you someone who is abnormal. But all of these patterns can occur in normal patients. Now, another concept that we have in our a lot of the setups that I see is that we rely a lot on something called K readings. Now, this K reading has the very similar problem as the curvature maps or the topography, and they only look at the anterior surface of the cornea, and a lot of them only look at the central 3 millimeters of the cornea. So if your cone has not reached the anterior surface of the cornea, or if your cone is paracentral, it's going to take a longer time for the anterior cornea to show a K1, K2 value of greater than 47 diopters that we're looking for. So as a screening protocol, K readings are fine, but as a diagnostic protocol, that will miss a high proportion of keratoconic patients. right? So when you look at this picture, the green is the cornea, and you can see that the cone is being developed at the posterior surface. So in this particular patient, you're going to have absolutely normal K readings, right? And you're going to see nothing on the anterior elevation map, and you're going to see nothing on the sagittal curvature map. But when you look at the posterior curvature maps, you're going to see a cone. And that cone is what should alert you to the fact that you should be excluding this patient from refractive surgery. Then you have the third map, and the last map, which is the pachymetry map. And the pachymetry is very important because previously we could only see the central corneal thickness. And as I said, central cornea is not usually where your thinnest point is. And so if you only look at the central cornea, you're going to miss everything, right? So this pachymetric progression, it tells you, you can see the thinnest point dislocation. So you can see as the cone develops, your thinnest point is going to move inferior-temporally usually, right? And it helps us to see if you have a cone and you're still wondering if this is keratoconic, you should be able to see it on pachymetry, right? And the normal thinnest location is anywhere less than 0.44 millimeters on the x-axis and 0.29 millimeters on the y-axis, temporally and inferiorly. So again, what are some normal pachymetric maps? So this concentric pachymetry, you can see that there is no thinnest point dislocation here. So there is nothing wrong with this cornea, the concentric. Then you've got a horizontal displacement. Now this particular case, a lot of you might be thinking that this is someone who has a thin cornea, but this is just a post-refractive surgery patient. And this was one of the maps that I had that I could show horizontal displacement. But the horizontal displacement usually is not an ectatic cornea. And again, this could come because of a misalignment or a large angle kappa. So it's very important to get serial exams. Getting 3-4 exams of the same patient will help you exclude misalignment and will help you exclude large angle kappas. Then abnormal pachymetry. So number one, vertical displacement of the thin shape, or something called dome-shaped corneas, right? So if you've got a vertical displacement of a cornea, you can corroborate those findings with the other cone on the elevation maps, and you can, a lot of the time, you should be able to, 95% of the time, be able to be very sure that this is a keratoconic cornea. Because you will see a thin cornea, and if you don't see a thin cornea, and it's a particularly thick cornea, but you see a displacement, then you have to start thinking that this is a weak cornea despite being very thick. And the second thing that can cause this is the constant rubbing of the eye. So constant rubbing of the eye can cause the same inferior temporal displacement, and it will usually go in the direction of the rubbing of the eye. So a lot of us, we rub nasally, and that's where your cone tends to shift, because that's where your trauma is. And then two other conditions that you can see on a pachymetry are your pellucid marginal degeneration, and you'll see this bell-shaped curve. It took me a while to understand why this was a bell, but you can see very clearly here that this is the bottom of the bell and this is the top of the bell here. So the bell-shaped cornea is the hallmark of pellucid marginal degeneration. Then you've got keratoglobus, where you will see just a globalized thinning of the cornea, a limbus to limbus thinning in keratoglobus. Alright, so just to highlight some of the principles that I just talked about. This person, if you look at his K readings, right, and if you look at this analysis and you just put this person on a keratometric analysis, right, you've got a K1 of 44.3 and a K2 of 44.9, right? So a lot of us would have said that this is an absolutely normal cornea, right? There's nothing wrong here. But then let's look at the thinnest local. You've got a 493 micron cornea with a 0.54 and a 0.68 displacement. So this is the first thing that should have alerted you right now that this is not a normal cornea, even though his K readings are normal, right? Now you look at the maps. You can see one, there is a dome-shaped cornea that is displaced inferior temporally. You've got a cone that you can very clearly visibly see in the paracentral region right here. And in this patient, you can actually see that the cone has reached the anterior surface. You can see +7, +6 elevations here, even though you don't see it on the K reading. So a little bit more progression and his K reading will start to change. Then another case. You've got a case here, and now you've got a K reading of 46.7, and the first lecture was around 30 minutes. I don't know. it was longer than this. So the first two K readings were here are 46.7 and 50.4, right? So now we're thinking this is keratoconus, right? The K reading has told us that this is a very high K reading. Now you're looking at the thinnest point dislocation, right here. You see a 504 micron person with 0.22 and a 0.00. So not a lot of, you've got a horizontal shift, but you have nothing else. Now you look at them here, and you see a concentric cornea on pachymetric analysis. You cannot see any of the cone. Sagittal curvature is normal as well, and no posterior anterior elevations. So if you were on K reading, this person would be classified as keratoconus and be offered CXL, not offered refractive surgery. But this is a normal cornea, even though he has a high K reading. Alright, so this is the Belin Ambrosio display that we looked at, that we can look at on the Pentacam. Now if someone is working on the Galilei or the Sirius, this is not a display. I don't think that's available to you, but it's a very good thing to know because it's an amazing display. So, the first part of the display, right, so here, this part of the display shows you the front elevation. So this is the front elevation in the normal Westwood sphere. Under that is the front elevation with an enhanced Westwood sphere, and this shows you the difference between the elevations. Now this is the back elevation with a normal BFS, with enhanced BFS, and the difference between the two. This was very clever from Dr. Belin, and this is the corneal spatial thickness profile, which we will go over later. Now, again, same eye, right? This is the same eye, and now you're seeing that yes, there is a lot of difference, very clear, but you can see that a +23, +22 elevation, you can see the cone in the front elevation anyway, but when you put it on the elevation difference and you put it on the enhanced Westwood sphere, as you can see this one, you can see the exaggeration of that cone, and you can see the position of that cone, and the front difference is just very obvious here. So there's not a lot of things that you want to do here. But here, if you're relying on the difference, the back difference here, you can see that the difference is in the greens. So this looks absolutely normal on the difference map. But then let's look for the cone. You can see here, you're not looking at any cone. But when you enhance this, you can see the position of the cone is paracentrally placed. And you can see the +21 elevations. So this is a keratoconic cornea, right? That's the importance of learning a normal and enhanced Westwood sphere. Then the other thing that you want to look for is the thickness progression, right? So the cornea is thin in the center and then progressively thickens. And this progression is faster in someone who has a keratoconic cornea, and this is what Dr. Ambrosio has used to his advantage, right? So this first graph shows you the corneal thickness spatial profile. It goes to the thinnest point and then it maps out every 1 millimeter and then shows you the progression of the thickness profile. Now, this is, I don't know why they put it this way, but the more you go to downwards, the thicker the cornea is. Usually we tend to look at it the other way. And then the percentage thickness increases, what percentage, every millimeter, how much percentage of that cornea of that thickness has increased. Then the other thing that you want to see is the average progression, right? The average progression here, when it's above 1.20, that should send red signals into your head. And if it's below 0.8, again, that could be an edematous cornea. Right. Alright, so just the types of curves that we can see on thickness progression, right? So you've got a quick sloping curve. So what does that mean? So for a quick sloping curve, you only want to analyze the data before the 6 millimeter mark, and then you want to see the curve leaving this normal curve quicker than you would expect it, right? So if you see, it's following this very well, but then here it tends to fall down. Now you can see this a little bit better on the percentage thickness increase, where you're seeing something that started in the middle of this range and then has dipped below. Now how do you say that for sure that this is a quick sloping curve? You look at the average, and the average here is above 1.2, and that should have sent red signals into your head that no, this is not a normal cornea. Then you have the S-shaped curve. Now the S-shaped curve is something that dips below and then comes back to its normal shape. So if you can see here, look, it dips below and then comes back to its normal shape. Now here, usually the average is above 1.2, but a lot of the time an S-shaped curve will not show you a high average because it's coming back to the normal. So the S-shaped curve should automatically lead you to believe to an ectatic cornea. It's a very sensitive indicator. Then you have a flat curve, and in a flat curve you are thinking someone who has an average of 0.8, and a flat curve is just a straight line, or it's going above, away from the normal. And here you're going to see someone who has a corneal guttata, or someone who has a Fuchs endothelial dystrophy, or a bullous keratopathy. And then you've got an inverted curve, which is very rare to find, we don't know why this happens. It can be in normal corneas, or it can be in some cases of pellucid marginal degeneration. Then you have the Belin Ambrosio display D value, right? So these are the 5 values that you see, and then you get a D value at the end. What do these values mean, right? So the first value is the difference in the front elevation. So the first map that I showed you, it shows you the difference in the front elevation, and it's basically made on the last map that you see. Now again, if this is normal, it doesn't mean it's normal if you can see that there's a cone being formed on the enhanced vessel scale. Second one is the difference in back elevation. Third is the progression index. Fourth is the thinnest point. And the last is the thinnest point displacement. And then you get a final D. Now, the final D you attain by doing a regression analysis of all of these amongst normal patients. It does a regression analysis and it gives you a D value. Now, the most weightage of something is the progression index. If the progression index is abnormal and everything else is normal, the D will usually be abnormal. Now, the standard deviation of the population, the D basically stands for the standard deviation. So white is less than 1.6 standard deviation, yellow is 1.6 to 2.6, and a red is 2.6, meaning they are very off the normal. That's the red. Now, the D value is great in picking out keratoconics, right? So if you've got a red, you can be very sure that this is a keratoconic patient. But if the D value is normal, that does not mean that the patient is normal. It doesn't have a very good specificity. It has a great sensitivity, not a very good specificity. So if someone has a white D, that does not mean he's normal. It's not a specific test. Alright, again, this is the same case that I showed you where the K reading was high and everything else was normal. So let's look at the Belin Ambrosio display. Right? In the Belin Ambrosio display, you can see, look at the best fit sphere on both of them. There is no, you can't see a cone, right? The differences are normal and you can't see a cone even though the K readings are high. The average is 1.07. So even the average is within normal limits and you do not see any quick sloping curve, you don't see anything. So the K reading you will miss, you will overdiagnose and you will miss a lot of keratoconic patients. Then you have case number 2 where you have absolutely normal K readings, borderline K readings, 47.1 and 42.3. Now the other thing that should alert you to someone who's a keratoconic is that difference. 42.3 and 47.1, there's a large difference in that K reading and that is another indicator of a keratoconic cornea. Now if you look at the thinnest local, you can see minus 0.48, minus 0.48, meaning you are seeing some displacement, right? So if you look at the pachymetry now, you're still seeing a dome-shaped cornea that's going downward, it's protruding downward. But still, even on that pachymetry, even though the thinnest point is dislocated, I would be like, is it or is it not? But then, and then you look at the sagittal curvature and it's absolutely normal. You look at the back elevation data and now you can clearly identify the cone. You can see that there's a paracentral cone right here, and even if you're just looking at the quantitative variables, you can see this person is not a normal patient. And then you can see someone who has back elevation has protruded to the front, and now you can also see the front elevation data. Now if you look at the Belin Ambrosio display, I'll just take 2 more. If you look at the Belin Ambrosio display, you can see that the D value is 2.70. The average is not too bad, but you can see the cone. And that's why you can see that this is a keratoconic cornea with fair certainty. But again, this is something that I wanted to highlight, but we don't have time, so this is something I'm just going to skip over. Now case 3. Case 3, you've got that person with 47.9 and a 46.3, right, K reading, and you've got a thinnest local of 0.19 and 0.39. So not very displaced. You've got good curvature map, but then you go to the back elevation data, and again you can see the cone, you can see the exaggeration, and even the elevation data is out of range, and you can see that cone come onto the anterior surface. And then you go on to the Belin Ambrosio display, and you're seeing something called a quick sloping curve, and you're seeing a high average of 1.31 and a D value of 2.33, which is in the yellow range. And look at the progression index. It's gone into the red, which is the highest predictor in this entire model, and that's why you have a yellow D value. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.